The wind carried the scent of pine and frost through the village of Eldergrove, but beneath it, Elara could smell fear. It was a bitter, metallic taste that clung to the back of her throat. Tonight was a full moon, and while the great wolves of the Lycan Council ran free and howled under its light, she was to remain in her small hut on the edge of the woods, confined, watched. She knew the whispered words that followed her quiet steps through the forest, marked, not for her crimes, for she had committed none, not for her defiance, for she lived in humble service. She was marked for the simple, terrible crime of being different. She was a healer without a pack, a human soul with a touch that could mend the wounds of creatures who saw her as less than dust, and the council had finally tired of her gentle defiance. They had decreed it at the last gathering. Under the full moon's peak, when the Lycan power was at its zenith, her life would be forfeit. A message to all humans who dared to dwell so close to their sacred territories. Elara's hands did not tremble as she lit the single candle on her rough-hewn table. They were steady, these hands, that had set broken bones and soothed fevers. But her heart was a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. She was not ready. The forest outside her window was a wall of impenetrable darkness, a living thing that held her fate. She could hear them now, the distant, echoing howls that spoke of power and ancient law. They were coming. She had been given this final night to make her peace. But what peace was there to be made when your life was deemed a weed to be plucked? She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the wool coarse and comforting. She would not run. Where would a human outrun a Lycan? No, she would meet her end with the same quiet dignity with which she had lived. She tended her small herb garden, she spoke to the birds, she healed what she could. It would have to be enough. The howls grew closer, a symphony of imminent judgment. The air grew thick, pressing against the walls of her hut. Elara extinguished the candle, preferring the darkness. She sat on the edge of her narrow cot, listening to the sounds of the forest die away. Even the crickets had fallen silent. Then she heard it. Not the heavy tread of wolfen feet, but a new sound, a tiny, desperate whimper. It came from under her bed. At first, she thought it a trick of her terrified mind, but it came again, a soft, pitiful cry of pure need. Frowning, Elara knocked on the cold earth floor. She peered into the shadows, and there, nestled in a hollow she had not dug, wrapped in leaves and moss, were 3 small, squirming bodies. Wolf pups. Their eyes were barely open, a milky blue, and their fur was a downy silver gray, untouched by the world. They were impossibly small, impossibly vulnerable. A wave of protective instinct, fierce and sudden, washed over her, drowning her own fear. Who would leave such precious creatures here, on this of all nights? Carefully, she gathered them one by one, their tiny hearts beating like hummingbirds against her palms. She placed them on her cot, wrapping them in her shawl. They nuzzled against the warmth, their whimpers softening. As she stroked the head of the smallest, a strange warmth spread from her fingertips. The pup, who had been shivering, stilled and let out a contented sigh. The other 2 turned their blind faces towards her touch, seeking it. In that moment, her own doom was forgotten. These lives needed her. It was a purpose, a final, beautiful purpose. The door of her hut exploded inward. Splinters rained down. Framed in the moonlight stood a massive, dark-furred wolf, its eyes burning like molten gold. Behind it, she sensed more shadows, more glowing eyes. The Alpha King, Kaelen, had come to deliver the sentence himself. He shifted in a blur of motion and light, and where the wolf stood, now loomed a man of formidable power, clad in shadows and authority. His face was all sharp angles and grim purpose. His gaze swept the hut, dismissing its poverty, and landed on her. Elara stood, placing herself between the Alpha and the cot. She said nothing. Her chin lifted. Kaelen's voice was a low rumble, the sound of stone grinding against stone. "Elara of no pack, the council's decree is to be carried out. Do you have any final words?" His eyes held no malice, only the cold finality of law. But before Elara could speak, a tiny sound broke the deadly silence. A squeak, then another. From the bundle on her cot, a small silver head poked out. Then another. The 3 pups, disturbed by the intrusion, began to mew. Kaelen's eyes, which had been fixed on Elara, snapped to the cot. His expression of implacable judgment shattered into one of utter, stunned disbelief. He took a step forward, then another, his imposing form suddenly hesitant. What is this?" Elara whispered, finding strength from her need to explain for them. "They were under my bed. I found them just now." Kaelen ignored her. He moved to the cot, his movements uncharacteristically slow. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering over the smallest pup. The pup, sensing the immense power before it, whimpered and twisted its head, not away from Kaelen, but towards Elara, nuzzling the air in her direction. Kaelen's hand froze. He tried with another, gently touching its back. The pup squirmed, letting out a distressed cry, its tiny paws scrambling as if to crawl to Elara. A profound silence filled the hut, heavier than before. Kaelen straightened, his golden eyes wide with a shock so deep it looked like fear. A profound silence filled the hut, heavier than before. Kaelen straightened, his golden eyes wide with a shock so deep it looked like fear. He looked from the pups to Elara and back again. "They seek your touch," he murmured, not to her, but to himself, as if recalling an old, half-forgotten lesson. "They answer only to you." He turned his gaze fully upon her, and the cold law was gone, replaced with a blazing, terrifying intensity. The Silver Triad, the lost ones. The prophecy says they would choose their guide in the darkest hour, a guide not of our blood. Elara could only stare, clutching her worn shawl. "Prophecy? I don't understand." Kaelen's next words changed everything. They did not spare her life, they bound it to something far greater. "The decree is suspended. You will come with me, now. Bring them." He turned, his command leaving no room for argument. The wolves at the door parted. Elara, her mind reeling, her heart a storm of confusion and a fragile, desperate hope, carefully gathered the 3 warm bundles into her arms. The Alpha King had not come to end her life tonight. He had come, it seemed, to witness its impossible beginning. The journey to the Lycan stronghold, Blackstone Keep, was a blur of shadow and motion. Elara was placed on the back of a great silent wolf, not Kaelen, but one of his stern guards. She held the pups close to her chest, wrapped securely in her shawl, feeling the rhythmic surge of muscle beneath her. The forest was a dark river around them, and the moon, their judge just moments ago, now seemed a cold, observing eye. She dared not speak, dared not ask the questions screaming in her mind. The prophecy, the Silver Triad, what had she stumbled into? The warmth of the 3 small lives against her was the only real grounding thing in a world that had tilted on its axis. Blackstone Keep rose from the cliffs like a jagged tooth against the night sky. It was not a place of graceful spires, but of brutal, imposing strength. Torchlight flickered from narrow windows, casting long, dancing shadows. They entered through a massive gate, and Elara was acutely aware of the eyes upon her. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of Lycans in both forms watched her passage. Their gazes were not just curious, they were shocked, hostile, wary. A human, not in chains, but carried with care, holding the sacred pups. Whispers slithered through the stone corridors like snakes. Human, healer, the marked one. Why does she live? She was taken not to a dungeon, but to a set of chambers high in a tower. The room was spacious but austere, with a large hearth, a sturdy bed, and a smaller, padded basket by the fire. A silent female Lycan with sharp eyes laid out simple clothes, a tunic and trousers of soft linen, and a bowl of water, before leaving without a word. The door, though lacking bars, felt like a seal. Elara was a prisoner of circumstance now, not of sentence. Gently she placed the sleeping pups in the basket, tucking the shawl around them. Their bellies were full of the warm goat milk a guard had grudgingly provided. She sank onto the bed, her body trembling with delayed shock. She had expected to be dead. Instead, she was in the heart of the wolf's den, surrounded by creatures who saw her as a mystery at best, a blasphemy at worst. In the council chamber far below, Kaelen faced a storm of his own. The room was filled with the senior members of the Lycan Council, their faces etched with lines of power and disapproval. Torchlight gleamed on fur and sharp eyes. Kaelen, a council elder with a silver-streaked beard and eyes like flint, slammed his fist on the stone table. "You brought the human here, into the sacred keep? Kaelen, have the moon stolen your reason? The decree was clear. Her existence is an insult." Kaelen stood at the head of the table, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable granite. "The decree was made before this development, before the Triad was found." "Found with her," snapped another elder, a woman named Lyra, her voice a low snarl. "A coincidence that reeks of manipulation. How did the lost pups come to be in the hut of a condemned human? It is a trick, a human trick." "Did you see them?" Kaelen's voice cut through the din, quiet but absolute. "They do not know tricks. They shrank from my touch, from any Lycan touch in that hut. They sought hers. They were calmed by her hand. Explain that, if it is a trick." A heavier silence fell. An old wolf named Borin, so ancient his fur was white, spoke, his voice a dry rustle. "The old words, the prophecy of the silver dawn. When the moon marks the outsider's end, the Triad of silver shall descend. Not to blood, but to the gentle hand, shall they bind the fate of the promised land. We thought it mere poetry, forgotten lore." "We cannot base the fate of our kind on forgotten lore and the behavior of blind pups," Kaelen insisted, though his certainty wavered. "What is the alternative?" Kaelen asked, his golden eyes sweeping the room. "We kill her, as decreed, and then what? The Triad whimpers for a touch they will never feel again. They fade. They die. And with them, according to that mere poetry, dies our hope for the next generation's strength, for unity against the gathering threats you all sense but refuse to name." He leaned forward, his power pressing against them. "The rogue moon pack grows bolder in the east. Our own lands grow restless. The Triad's return on this specific night is a sign. Ignoring it because the sign comes wrapped in human skin is not wisdom, it is pride, and pride will be our end." Lyra glared. "So, what is your will, Alpha King? We revoke the decree? We welcome this human as an honored guest?"
Lyra glared. "So, what is your will, Alpha King? We revoke the decree? We welcome this human as an honored guest?" "She stays," Kaelen stated, finality in every syllable. Under my protection, under watch, she will tend to the Triad. We will observe. We will consult the ancient texts. We will learn what this means. But no harm comes to her. From this moment, Elara the healer is under the shield of Blackstone. Any who raise a claw or a word against her answer directly to me. The threat hung in the air, colder than the stone walls. He had not asked for a vote. He had declared it. He was Alpha, and his will, for now, was law. But as he left the chamber, the weight of their rebellious silence followed him. He had traded one problem for a far greater, more dangerous one. He had tied his authority, and possibly the future of his people, to a human woman and 3 tiny, fragile pups. Back in the tower, Elara jolted awake from a fitful doze. The fire had died to embers. A soft, synchronized whining came from the basket. She hurried over. The pups were awake, wriggling, hungry and confused in this strange place. She warmed more milk, her movements automatic, her mind still churning. As she fed them, one by one, holding each close, she felt that strange warmth again in her fingertips. The pup in her arms, the one with a tiny white star on its forehead, latched onto her finger after feeding, holding it with a trust that made her throat tight. "What am I to you? And what are you to me?" The answer came not in words, but in a sudden, chilling sound that echoed up from the courtyards below. A long, baleful howl, not of patrol or communication, but of pure, undiluted challenge. It was answered by another, then another, from different points within the keep. A discordant symphony of dissent. The message was clear. Not all accepted the Alpha's new law. Elara pulled the pups closer, shielding them with her body. The fragile hope of the tower room felt like a tiny candle in a vast, hungry dark. Kaelen had given her a temporary life, but outside that door, in the heart of Blackstone itself, enemies were already baring their teeth. Dawn painted the high cliffs in streaks of rose and gold, but little of that gentle light reached Elara's tower chamber. A tense, gray half-light prevailed. A different female Lycan arrived with a breakfast tray, hard bread, cheese, more goat's milk. Her name was Marin, and though her posture was stiff, her eyes held the flicker of something other than hostility, acute curiosity. She watched, unblinking, as Elara fed the pups. "They take the milk well," Marin observed, her voice neutral. "They are hungry," Elara replied softly, not looking up. She was learning the pups' tiny personalities. The largest, a male, was bold and vocal, always nudging his siblings aside. The female was delicate, observant, even with her eyes unopened. And the smallest, the one with the star, was the most affectionate, seeking constant contact. "They should be with a Lycan nursing mother," Marin said, a hint of dogma in her tone. "Has one been found who will accept them?" Elara asked, finally meeting the Lycan's gaze. Marin's lips thinned. "None have been asked. The Alpha has decreed you are their caretaker." She said it as if stating a bizarre natural fact, like rain falling upward. "He will come for you. You are to be presented to others." She left, the door closing with a soft, definitive click. Presented. Like a curious artifact. Elara's stomach tightened. She cleaned the pups, her hands steady, but her mind racing. She had always been an outsider in Eldergrove, tolerated for her skills, but never embraced. Now she was the ultimate outsider, a spectacle in the den of wolves. She dressed in the provided clothes, finding them strangely comfortable, allowing for movement. She was braiding her long, plain hair when the door opened again. Kaelen stood there. In the daylight, he was even more imposing. He wore a dark, simple tunic that did nothing to soften the breadth of his shoulders or the intensity of his presence. His golden eyes assessed her, then went immediately to the basket by the fire where the pups were sleeping in a contented pile. Something in his stance relaxed, just a fraction. "They are well?" he said. "They are," Elara said, standing straight. "They fed at dawn." He nodded. "Come, there is someone you must meet. Bring them." "Is it safe?" The question slipped out, born of the challenging howls she'd heard in the night. Kaelen's eyes flashed. "You are under my shield. Nowhere in this keep is safer for you than by my side. Remember that." It was not a comfort, it was a command and a warning. She gathered the pups into a sling she had fashioned from her shawl, holding them against her chest. Their warmth was a small shield against the cold apprehension she felt. They walked through corridors of cold stone, descended a wide spiral staircase. Lycans they passed stopped and stared. Some bowed their heads to Kaelen, but their eyes burned with questions as they stared at Elara. Others turned away deliberately, a silent rebuke. The air was thick with tension. Finally, they entered a part of the keep that felt different. It was quieter, older. The air smelled of dried herbs, parchment and age. They stopped before a heavy oak door. Kaelen knocked, not as an alpha, but with a measured respect. "Enter." The voice from within was as dry and delicate as fallen leaves. The room was a library, but not like any Elara had imagined. Scrolls and ancient books filled shelves that reached into shadowy heights. A fire crackled in a grate, and sitting beside it in a high-backed chair was the oldest Lycan Elara had ever seen. It was Boren, the elder from the council. In this setting, he seemed less a politician and more a relic of a forgotten time. His white fur was thin, his face a map of deep lines, but his eyes, a pale milky blue, were sharp and clear. "Boren," Kaelen said, his voice lower. "This is Elara."
Boren, Kaelen said, his voice lower. "This is Elara." Boren did not look at Kaelen, his pale eyes fixed on Elara, and more specifically on the bundle at her chest. "Come closer, child. Let me see them." Elara approached, an instinct telling her this being, for all his age, was not a threat. She gently pulled back the shawl, revealing the sleeping Silver Triad. Boren leaned forward, his nostrils flaring. He did not touch them. He simply looked, and as he did, a profound sadness and a dawning awe mingled on his ancient face. "The Silver Triad," he breathed. "I never thought to lay eyes on you. The last were born 2 centuries ago. Their guide was Lyanna of the Howling Crag, the greatest warrior seer of her age." He finally lifted his eyes to Elara. "And now they come to us, and choose you." "I did not choose this," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Choice is rarely given in matters of destiny," Boren murmured. "The prophecy is fragmentary, recorded in a time of great war. It speaks of the Triad's return in a time of fracture. It says they will not bond with a Lycan of pure blood, but with a guide not of our blood, whose touch is not of claw, but of mending. Their bond with their guide is what unlocks their latent power. Separated, they are merely rare pups. Bonded, they are a key. To what? The texts are unclear. Unity, a new era, or a terrible awakening." Kaelen shifted. "The Council dismisses it as myth." "The Council fears what it does not understand," Boren said, a hint of disdain in his rasp. "They see a human and think weakness. They do not see the force that placed these 3 in her path on the very night of her death." He looked back at Elara. "May I see your hand?" Hesitantly, Elara extended her hand. Boren took his own hand gnarled but gentle. He turned it over, studying her palm, her fingers. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowed. There is no magic here, no latent Lycan blood, as some fools have whispered. Just humanity, a profound and simple humanity, and a strength of spirit that is quieter than a howl, but just as deep. He released her hand. The bond is forming. I can feel its echo around you, like a faint scent of spring in a dead winter. You must tend to them, protect them, and you must learn, Elara. You must learn about us, our ways, our history, for their sake and for yours. Why? Elara asked. If the council wants me gone, why not just take them from me? They could try to raise them. Boren's pale eyes seemed to see through her. Because once the bond of choice is initiated, it cannot be severed without breaking the Triad's spirit. You could walk away now, and they would waste away yearning for a connection only you can provide, and we would be left with 3 fading symbols of a hope we murdered. No, child, you are woven into this tapestry now. The threads of your life and theirs are entwined. The weight of his words pressed down on her. It was not just her life anymore. It was the fate of these innocent creatures, and perhaps, impossibly, the fate of the very beings who had sentenced her to die. Kaelen watched her, his expression unreadable. Boren will be your tutor. You will spend part of each day here. The rest you will care for the Triad in your chambers. My guards will be posted for your safety, he added, though the implication was clear, and for our security. As they left the library, Elara felt more trapped than ever, but the cage had changed. It was no longer a prison of impending death, but a gilded cage of destiny, responsibility, and 1,000 watching, hostile eyes. She looked down at the 3 sleeping faces nestled against her. A guide not of our blood, she whispered. What had she guided them into, and who would guide her through the snarling politics and ancient perils of Blackstone Keep? The only answer was the steady, silent presence of the Alpha King walking beside her, a man bound to her by a prophecy he might not believe in, but by a duty he would never abandon. Days blurred into a tense routine. Elara's world became the tower chamber, the ancient library, and the guarded path between them. Under Boren's patient, rasping tutelage, she began to learn. She learned of the Lycan clans, their proud and often bloody history. She learned of the great pact that formed the council and the simmering tensions with the outsider rogue Moon Pack, who rejected council law. She learned of their connection to the moon, not as a monster's curse, but as a source of spiritual power and communal unity. Boren spoke with a scholar's detachment, but Elara heard the love and worry for his people beneath the words. The pups grew rapidly, their eyes opened, revealing irises of a startling, luminous silver blue. They began to wobble on unsteady legs, exploring the confines of the chamber, and their bond with Elara deepened in quiet, miraculous ways. They no longer just sought her for food or comfort. The bold one, whom she had started to call Asher, would bring her a stray thread from the rug as a gift. The delicate female, Luna, would sit quietly by her foot as she read Boren's scrolls. The small, star-marked one, whom she called Finn, had taken to sleeping curled in the crook of her neck, his tiny breaths warm against her skin. When she was anxious, they would cluster around her, a living, warm barrier against the world. When she hummed an old healing tune from her village, they would still, their little heads cocked, listening. It was a language of the heart, silent and profound. But the keep itself was a chorus of hostile whispers. Marin, who brought meals, became a reluctant but consistent source of news from below.
Kaelen's faction grows louder, she reported one afternoon, her voice low. They say the Alpha is bewitched, that the human uses ancient forbidden magic on the Triad to control them. They call for a challenge of insight, a formal questioning of your bond before the Full Moon Council.
They called for a challenge of insight, a formal questioning of your bond before the Full Moon Council. Elara's blood ran cold. A formal challenge could mean tests. It could mean separation. It could mean anything. What does the Alpha say? Marin shrugged, a very human gesture. He says nothing. He listens, he watches. It is his way. But the stone has ears, healer. Be careful where you walk. The warning proved prophetic. One evening, returning from the library with the pups in their sling, Elara took a wrong turn. The corridors all looked the same in the torchlight. She found herself in a narrower, colder hallway, one lined with suits of ancient armor. The air felt still and heavy. Suddenly, a figure detached itself from the shadows. It was a young male Lycan, his expression twisted with contempt. He blocked her path. Look, the human pet, taking her cursed cubs for a stroll. Elara stopped, her heart hammering. She clutched the sling closer. I am returning to my chambers. Please let me pass. Your chambers, he sneered, taking a step closer. You have no chambers here. You have a cage. And soon you won't even have that. We don't need a human wet nurse. We need a proper Lycan to teach the Triad what they are. He reached out, not for her, but for the sling. Give them here. I'll take them to someone worthy. Pure, instinctual protectiveness surged through Elara. She stepped back, turning her shoulder to shield the pups. Do not touch them. Her voice was low, but it held a note she didn't recognize, a firm, unyielding authority that came from a place deeper than fear. The Lycan's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. You dare command me? His hand shifted, claws beginning to elongate. Before Elara could react, a new voice, cold and lethal, cut through the gloom. She does not command you. I do. Kaelen emerged from the intersecting corridor like a wraith. He did not raise his voice. He did not snarl. He simply stood there, and the air around him seemed to thicken with palpable power. The young Lycan froze, his bravado evaporating. He dropped his hand, his claws retracting. Alpha, I was merely... You were threatening the Triad's guide under my shield. Kaelen finished, his tone conversational, which was more terrifying than any shout. That is a challenge to my authority. Do you wish to formalize that challenge? In the pit? Now? The Lycan paled. No, Alpha, forgive me. I lost my way. Find it, Kaelen said, the finality in the words like the closing of a tomb. And if you ever cross this hallway again, or look upon her with anything but respect, you will wish you had challenged me. Go. The Lycan scurried away, disappearing into the shadows. The sudden silence was ringing. Elara's knees felt weak. She looked at Kaelen, who was now watching her, his golden eyes unreadable in the flickering light. Thank you, she breathed. He didn't acknowledge the thanks. Instead, he said, You told him not to touch them. You did not plead. You did not cry. You commanded. It was an observation, not a question. They are mine to protect, Elara said, the truth of it solid in her chest. Kaelen was silent for a long moment. Then he gave a single, slow nod. Come, I will show you the true way back. He walked beside her, his presence a silent, intimidating shield. As they walked, he spoke, his voice low. The challenge of insight has been formally called. It will happen at the next full moon council. Elara's breath hitched. What will that mean? It means you will stand before the entire council. Kaelen will question you. They may demand a demonstration of the bond. They will try to find a crack, a flaw, to prove it is false or malicious. He glanced at her. Boren will prepare you, but preparation can only go so far. The bond must be real. It must be strong. He stopped before the door to her tower. Is it? Elara looked down at the sling. Asher was peeking out, his silver-blue eyes reflecting the torchlight. Luna and Finn were asleep, trusting her completely with their safety. She thought of the warmth in her hands, their quiet communication, the way they felt like an extension of her own soul. It is real, she said, with a certainty that surprised her. But is strong enough for your counsel? Kaelen's lips twitched, the ghost of something that wasn't a smile. We will see. Remember, their hostility is not just about you. It is about change. It is about fear of a future they cannot control. You and the Triad represent that future. He opened the door for her. Rest, healer. The whispers in the stone are growing into shouts. Soon you will need all your strength, not just to listen, but to answer. The door closed, leaving Elara alone with the pups and the echo of his words. The challenge was set. She was no longer just a caretaker in a gilded cage. She was a participant in a deadly game of politics and power. She placed the pups in their now too small basket, her mind racing. Boren would teach her the laws, the customs, but how did one prepare to defend a connection of the heart with words and logic? She looked at her hands, the hands of a healer, now the hands of a guide. The full moon was coming again, but this time it would not light her execution. It would illuminate her trial, and she had to be ready. Under Boren's guidance, Elara's education intensified. It was no longer just history and lore. It was law, protocol, the intricate dance of council politics. He taught her how to stand, how to meet a Lycan's gaze without challenge but without submission, how to phrase answers to avoid traps. They will ask you why you deserve this bond, Boren rasped over a scroll detailing ancient rituals. You will not speak of deserve. You will speak of service. You are not their owner. You are their guide. A shepherd does not deserve the flock. He serves it.
You are not their owner. You are their guide. A shepherd does not deserve the flock. He serves it. And if they ask me to prove it? Elara asked, her fingers absently stroking Finn's head as he slept in her lap. Asher and Luna were tussling with a knotted rope nearby. They may ask you to call them, to have them perform a simple task. The bond is not one of command, child. It is of harmony. You cannot make them do anything. You can only suggest, and they will follow because they trust your suggestion is for the good of the whole. He peered at her. You must find the calm center within you. Their silver will reflect your inner state. If you are fearful, they will be skittish. If you are angry, they will be defensive. If you are centered in your healer's heart, they will be at peace, and their connection to you will be clear for all to see. It was a daunting task. Her healer's heart felt buried under layers of anxiety and the crushing weight of expectation. She began to practice in the solitude of her chamber. She would sit in the middle of the floor, close her eyes, and seek that quiet place she used to find when preparing poultices or setting a bone, the place where the world narrowed to the task and the need. She would breathe deeply, and the pups, sensing her shift, would cease their play and come to sit around her, a silent, living meditation circle. In those moments, she felt the bond not as a responsibility, but a gentle, humming connection, a shared pulse. Kaelen observed from a distance.
He never interrupted her sessions with Boren, but she would sometimes feel his presence, a shift in the air, and look up to see him standing in the doorway of the library, watching silently before melting away. His visits to her chamber were brief and purposeful, checking on the Triad's progress, delivering news, always a model of detached, alpha-like efficiency. Yet Elara began to notice the subtle signs, the way his eyes lingered on the pups with a complex mix of awe and frustration, the way he had positioned his most trusted guards, Harlan and Jax, on her door, stern but fair warriors who had, grudgingly, begun to nod to her in acknowledgement, the way he had quietly ensured she had proper clothes, better food, a few scrolls of her own to read. It was not kindness, she told herself. It was strategic. She was an asset to be maintained. One afternoon, a crisis broke the routine. A commotion echoed from the lower courtyard, shouts, the clang of steel, panicked howls. Harlan stiffened outside her door. Elara rushed to the narrow window. She could see a cluster of Lycans below surrounding a cart. A hunting party had returned, and they were carrying a wounded man. Even from this height she could see the dark stain of blood, the unnatural angle of a leg. Her healer's instincts ignited, overriding all else. Without thinking, she scooped up the pups into their sling. "I must go down," she said to Harlan, her voice leaving no room for argument. "My orders are to keep you here, safe," he said, his hand on the door. "A man is dying down there. I am a healer. Your Alpha's shield protects me, does it not? Then let it protect me while I do what I was born to do." Her eyes held his, and something in her certainty, the echo of the authority she'd shown in the hallway, gave him pause. He muttered something into a small communication stone, then nodded grimly. "Stay close to me." The courtyard was a scene of controlled chaos. The wounded Lycan, a young male, lay on the cart, his face gray with pain and blood loss. A deep, ragged gash ran across his thigh. A rogue boar's tusk, someone said. The pack's own healer, a severe-looking elder named Goran, was barking orders, but his methods were crude, pressing a searing brand to the wound to cauterize it. The young Lycan screamed. "Stop!" The word rang out, clear and sharp, before Elara even realized she'd spoken. All eyes turned to her. She saw Kaelen there, his face a mask of thunderous disapproval. She saw other council members. And she saw Kaelen, pushing through the crowd, his expression unreadable. Goran glared. "You, human, this is Lycan business. Our ways are strong. We burn to seal. We heal with our own power." "You will seal the infection inside, and he will lose the leg or his life to fever," Elara said, moving forward. Harlan stayed at her shoulder, a silent bulwark. She ignored Goran, looking instead at the wounded Lycan's pain-glazed eyes. "May I?" she asked him directly. The young Lycan, through his agony, managed a weak nod. Elara set the sling with the pups down carefully nearby. She did not have her herbs, her tools, but she had her hands and her knowledge. She called for clean water, bandages, and honey, demanded it. To her surprise, it was Marin who rushed forward with a basin and cloths. Elara cleaned the wound with a firm, gentle touch, ignoring the gasps around her. She spoke softly to the young Lycan, telling her what she was doing, her voice a steady, calming rhythm. She applied the honey, a natural antiseptic, and bound the wound with clean linen. Her movements were efficient, sure, radiating a competence that was quiet, but absolute. As she worked, a hush fell over the courtyard. They watched the human healer, the marked one, tend to one of their own with a skill that was foreign, yet undeniably effective. The young Lycan's breathing eased, the gray tinge leaving his face. When she finished, she placed a hand on his forehead. "The fever may still come, but the wound is clean. Your body's strength will do the rest now." She looked up at Goran. "You can augment that strength, can't you? With your Lycan vitality?" Goran, stunned and defensive, gave a curt nod.
He placed his hands near the bandage, closing his eyes. A soft golden light emanated from his palms, different from Elara's mundane skill, but complementary. The young Lycan sighed in relief.
Different from Elara's mundane skill, but complementary. The young Lycan sighed in relief. Elara stood, wiping her hands on a cloth. The silence was profound. She felt hundreds of eyes on her. Then Kaelen stepped forward. He didn't look at her. He looked at his people. "We are a strong people," he said, his voice carrying across the stones. "Our strength lies in our claws, our fangs, our connection to the moon. But has our strength made us blind? Has it made us foolish enough to reject a skill that can preserve a warrior's life?" He turned his golden gaze on Kaelen. "A healer's touch is not a weakness. It is another kind of strength, one that mends, one that preserves." He finally looked at Elara, and in his eyes she saw something new, a flicker of respect that went beyond the prophecy. "Return to your chambers. You have done enough for today." As Harlan escorted her and the pups back, the atmosphere was different. The hostile stares were still there, but now mixed with confusion, curiosity, and in a few eyes, a dawning reconsideration. She had not argued politics. She had not defended the bond. She had simply healed. And in doing so, she had shown a facet of her humanity that was impossible to dismiss as trickery or witchcraft. It was practical, compassionate skill. Back in her tower, her hands trembled as the adrenaline faded. The pups nuzzled her, sensing her turmoil. She had acted on instinct, and it could have gone terribly wrong, but it hadn't. For the first time, she hadn't just been the human with the triad. She had been Elara, the healer, and the pack had seen it. The challenge of insight still loomed, but she had, perhaps, won a small battle in the heart of the pack itself, not with words or prophecy, but with the simple, undeniable power of a gentle hand. The quiet after the healing in the courtyard was not peace. It was the held breath before a storm. Elara could feel it in the very stones of Blackstone Keep. The overt hostility had softened into something more complex, a wary, watchful curiosity. But the faction led by Elder Kaelen did not relent. Their whispers became more focused, more insidious. They could not attack her healing, so they attacked the source. "The Triad's influence," they murmured. "She did not heal with her own power, but borrowed theirs. She is a siphon, draining their sacred energy for her human tricks." Boren dismissed it as jealous nonsense, but the idea, once planted, began to spread like a root through cracks. It found purchase in the hearts of those who feared the unknown. Elara tried to ignore it, pouring her focus into the pups and her studies. They were no longer tiny bundles. At 6 weeks old, Asher, Luna, and Finn were the size of small dogs, all long legs, oversized paws, and shimmering silver fur that seemed to hold moonlight even at noon. Their bond with Elara had deepened into something wordless and profound. They understood her moods, her silent commands. A look from her could halt Asher's rambunctious charge. A soft hum could bring Luna from a hiding place. Finn, her shadow, was her living barometer, pressing against her when tension filled the room. It was this bond that Kaelen decided to test, though he did not frame it as such. He came to her chamber one morning, his expression unreadable. "The Triad needs to understand the wild. They cannot be coddled in stone rooms forever. Their instincts must be awakened. You will accompany them, and me, into the Whispering Woods, today." It was not a request. Elara's heart leapt with a mixture of fear and a desperate longing for open sky. Is it safe? The Whispering Woods are part of Blackstone's sacred territory. They are safe from rogue packs, from other dangers. He met her gaze. That is what we must learn. Can you guide them in the wild? Can they protect you And can you protect them when the walls are trees and the ceiling is sky? Prepare them. We leave within an hour. The Whispering Woods earned their name. As Elara followed Kaelen along a narrow, mossy path, the dense canopy of ancient oaks and silver birch seemed to swallow sound and then murmur it back in sighs and rustles. It was beautiful, deep, and utterly alive. The pups, unleashed from their sling, exploded into the space with joyous abandon. Asher charged headlong into a thicket, scattering leaves. Luna moved with delicate, precise steps, her nose quivering as she decoded 1,000 new scents. Finn stayed closer to Elara, but his eyes were wide, drinking in the dappled light. Kaelen moved like a part of the forest itself, silent and observant. He did not instruct. He simply watched Elara call Asher back with a soft, sharp whistle before he strayed too far, watched her stroke Luna's head when the pups started at the sudden flutter of a grouse, watched Finn position himself subtly between Elara and a dense, dark patch of shadow. "They are alert," Kaelen said, his voice low, not to disturb the wood's rhythm. "They sense the hierarchy. They know I am Alpha, but their focus returns to you, always. It is not submission, it is alignment." Elara nodded, her senses stretched thin, trying to monitor all 3 pups at once in the vastness. They feel everything more sharply here. Their emotions are louder in my mind. Asher's excitement is a fizzy spark. Luna's curiosity is a cool, clear stream. Finn's vigilance is a steady, low hum. Kaelen stopped, turning to look at her with intense interest. You can distinguish their emotional states clearly. I suppose I can, Elara said, realizing it only as she said it. It's not words, it's sensations, impressions, like the difference between the scent of pine and the scent of damp earth. Before Kaelen could respond, the atmosphere changed. The whispering of the woods died. The pups froze in unison. Asher stopped his playful digging, his head snapping up. Luna let out a barely audible growl, a sound Elara had never heard from her. Finn pressed hard against Alara's leg, his body rigid. Kaelen was instantly in front of them, his posture shifting into something predatory, his head tilted, listening.
Kaelen was instantly in front of them, his posture shifting into something predatory, his head tilted, listening. A new sound reached Elara's ears, a low, rhythmic chanting, foreign and guttural, carried on a wind that shouldn't have been blowing. It came from a depression ahead, where mist clung to the ground like ghostly fingers. "What is that?" she breathed. "Remain here," Kaelen commanded, his voice pure alpha. "Hold the triad close. Do not move from this spot." He melted into the trees, becoming a shadow among shadows. The minutes stretched like tar. The chanting grew slightly louder, then faded. The woods were oppressively silent. The pups huddled around Elara, their earlier joy replaced by a focused, shared anxiety that thrummed through their bond and into her bones. She could feel their fear, but beneath it, a burgeoning protective instinct, a desire to form a circle around her. Suddenly, Kaelen was back, his face a mask of grim fury. "Rogue moon scouts," he spat. "On our very border. Performing a scent-obscuring ritual. They are probing our defenses." His golden eyes burned. "They were close, too close. Did you or the Triad sense them before the chanting?" Elara fought back. "The pups went still just before I heard the sound, a few seconds before." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "Their bond with you enhances their natural senses. They felt the intrusion of foreign Lycan energy through you. This is significant." He looked at the 3 silver pups, who were now watching him with solemn, ancient-seeming eyes. The prophecy spoke of the Triad as a key. Perhaps their first purpose is as a living ward, a beacon of unity that can sense discord. The walk back to Blackstone was swift and tense.
The incident in the woods was no mere excursion. It was a field test under fire, and the Triad, and by extension Elara, had passed in a way that changed the equation. They were not just symbols, they were potentially crucial to the pack's security. But the news Kaelen brought back was explosive. The rogue moon's boldness confirmed his warnings of growing external threat, giving weight to his protection of the Triad and their human guide. It also gave Thalen's faction a new dangerous angle. If the Triad was so sensitive, was keeping them tied to a fragile human not the greatest risk of all? The whispers in the stone began to weave a new treacherous thread. Perhaps the human was not just a siphon, but a liability, a weakness the rogues could exploit. That night, as a cold moon rose, Elara sat by her window, the pups asleep in a pile of furs by the fire. The warmth of the wild, the thrill of the pups' growth had been extinguished by the chill of the real world. The rogue moon was out there. Thalen's faction was in here, and she was caught between, with only 3 growing pups and the uncertain shield of an alpha whose people were fracturing. She had felt the pups' power in the woods, a shimmering net of awareness. But power, she knew, from her village, always attracted 2 things: those who wanted to use it and those who wanted to break. The challenge of insight was no longer just about proving a bond, it was about surviving the consequences of what that bond could do. The incident in the Whispering Woods sent ripples through Blackstone Keep that solidified into new, hardened positions. Kaelen used it to bolster his warnings in the council, his voice a hammer on the anvil of their complacency. The rogues scent weakness, they scent division. The Triad's sensitivity is a gift, a living alarm, but it is a gift bound to their guide. We break that bond at our peril. Thalen, ever the strategist, pivoted seamlessly. "You speak truth, Alpha," he said in the next council session, his voice oily with feigned concern. "Their sensitivity is indeed a powerful tool, precisely why it must not be entrusted to a vulnerable mortal human. What if the rogues target her, not to kill, but to capture? Her fear, her pain would scream through the bond to the Triad, crippling them, perhaps driving them mad. She is not their strength, Kaelen. She is a catastrophic weakness, a crack in our armor through which a dagger can be plunged." The argument was devilishly effective. It played on the pack's deepest instincts. Protect the weak, yes, but never let the weak become a danger to the strong. Elara heard it from Marin, whose reports were becoming increasingly sympathetic. "He is clever, Thalen," she muttered while changing the bed linens. "He paints you not as a villain, but a victim waiting to happen, a liability. It makes your protection seem not just foolish, but reckless." Elara felt the noose tightening. Her usefulness was now her greatest danger. The pups, sensing the escalating tension, became more clingy. Their play was subdued. They developed new concerning behaviors. Asher would sometimes stand guard at the chamber door, a low growl in his throat at unfamiliar footsteps. Luna began to hide small objects, a shiny spoon, a scroll clasp, in the furs as if building a secret hoard. Finn took to whimpering in his sleep, his paws twitching as if running from unseen terrors. Their individual personalities were being stressed and warped by the atmosphere of suspicion. Boren saw it too. In the library, he set aside the scroll on prophecies and studied the pups as they drowsed in a sunbeam. "The silver is clouding," he murmured, more to himself than to Elara. "Their spirits are tied to the pack's spirit, and the pack is divided. They feel the fracture. The challenge cannot come soon enough. This limbo is poisoning them." "What can I do?" Elara asked, desperation clawing at her throat. "How do I protect them from the very air they breathe?" "You must strengthen the core of your bond. You must give them an unshakable center. They reflect you, Elara. If your heart is a storm of fear and reaction, theirs will be a tempest. You must find and show them calm. You must show them what you are guiding them towards, not just what you are shielding them from." You must show them what you are guiding them towards, not just what you are shielding them from. It felt like an impossible task. How could she project calm when every shadow held a potential enemy, when every council meeting was a debate over her future? She tried. In the quiet hours, she would sit with them, not in meditation, but in simple, tactile connection. She would brush their silken fur, feeling the powerful muscles developing beneath. She would tell them stories, not Lycan prophecies, but human tales of kindness, of perseverance, of small, brave joys. She would describe the meadow flowers of Eldergrove, the taste of sun-warmed berries, the sound of a stream chuckling over stones. She painted a world with her words, a world beyond stone and suspicion, a world of gentle, ordinary wonders. And slowly, something shifted. Asher, listening to a tale of a clever rabbit, would relax his vigilant posture, his head tilting. Luna, upon hearing about hidden wildflower glens, would stop her frantic hoarding and simply listen, her eyes soft. Finn, soothed by descriptions of quiet, starlit nights, would sigh in his sleep, his nightmares receding. They were soothed not by grand destinies, but by the humble, human serenity at her core. The bond became less about shared anxiety and more about shared peace. Kaelen witnessed this transformation during one of his brief visits. He stood in the doorway, watching as Elara, her back to him, described the constellation her mother had called the healer's ladle to the enraptured pups. Her voice was a gentle melody in the stone room. The pups were a picture of tranquil focus, their earlier twitchiness gone. For a long moment, Kaelen did not move. The relentless alpha, the burdened king, seemed to simply absorb the scene. A profound, unguarded weariness flickered across his face. So brief, Elara almost missed it when she turned. He cleared his throat, the mask slamming back into place. The challenge is set for the night of the full moon, 3 days hence. Boren will finalize your preparation tomorrow. He paused, his eyes on Finn, who had padded over to him. To Elara's astonishment, Finn sat before the alpha and let out a soft woof, not of fear, but of acknowledgement. Kaelen, after a heartbeat, slowly knelt, a staggering gesture for an alpha, and offered his closed fist. Finn sniffed it, then gently bumped it with his head. It was a moment of profound, wordless truce. Kaelen stood, his movements stiff. He said, "The weight of their silver is very heavy, heavier than I understood. They do not just carry a prophecy, they carry the hope for a different kind of strength, a quieter one." He looked directly at Elara, and the sheer intensity of his gaze felt like a physical touch. At the challenge, they will not ask you about prophecies or politics. Thalen will try to make it about that. But the core question, the only one that matters, will be this: is your heart strong enough to be their calm in the coming storm? Show them that. Show them the healer's heart. It is the only argument that cannot be refuted. He left then, leaving Elara with his words echoing in the silent room. The pups gathered around her, their warmth seeping into her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, something else was solidifying. Resolve. Not the fiery resolve of a warrior, but the deep-rooted resolve of a healer who chooses to stand her ground. She was not a weapon, not a key, not a weakness. She was a guide, and in 3 days' time, under the judging eye of the full moon, she would have to guide not just the Triad, but the entire Lycan Council to see the truth that the 3 silver pups already knew. The storm was coming, that she would be their calm. It was all she had, and it would have to be enough. The day of the full moon dawned clear and cold, a cruel parody of serenity. The very air in Blackstone Keep crackled with anticipation. It was a palpable energy, a collective held breath that seeped under doors and thickened in corridors. For Elara, the hours dragged, each one a mountain to climb. Boring came in the morning for a final session, but it was less a lesson and more a series of quiet affirmations. "Remember your center," he rasped, his gnarled hand on her shoulder. "The bond is not a leash, it is a harmony. Let them hear your song, and they will sing with you." Marin helped her dress in a simple, dove-gray gown, something between human attire and Lycan simplicity, provided by the Alpha's order. "It has no clan markings. It means you belong to all, and to none. A wise choice." Her eyes held a flash of encouragement. "Many are watching, not all with ill will." As the sun began its descent, painting the cliffs in bloody hues, Harlan and Jax arrived at her door. Their expressions were grave, ceremonial. "It is time, guide," Harlan said, the title deliberate and respectful. The pups, sensing the monumental shift in the day, were unusually calm. They circled her, not with nervous energy, but with a solemn, focused purpose. Their silver fur gleamed in the torchlight. Elara took a final deep breath, feeling for that calm center. She found it, not as a void, but as a living thing. The memory of her mother's hands, the scent of her herb garden, the trust in 3 pairs of silver blue eyes. She said, "Stay close, stay true." The walk to the council chamber was a gauntlet. Lycans lined the route, a sea of faces in the flickering torchlight. She saw curiosity, hostility, skepticism, and here and there a fleeting nod of respect, perhaps from the family of the warrior she had healed. The chamber itself took her breath away.
It was a vast, natural cavern behind the keep, open to the sky where the full moon shone down, a colossal, brilliant coin in the velvet black. Stone benches rose in tiers, filled to capacity with Lycans of all ages and status. At the floor level, in a semicircle, sat the council elders on stone thrones. Kaelen occupied the central position, his expression meticulously neutral. Kaelen stood apart, near the mouth of the cavern, a silhouette against the moonlit sky, the very image of detached authority. The silence, when she entered, was absolute and crushing. Hundreds of eyes pinned her to the spot. The pups, flanking her, held their heads high. Elara walked to the center of the open space, a circle of smooth stone, worn by centuries of feet. She stopped, folded her hands before her, and waited. Kaelen arose. His voice, amplified by the cavern's acoustics, boomed. "Elara, of no pack, you stand before the Lycan Council on the night of the full moon, under the eyes of our ancestors. A challenge of insight has been called regarding your bond with the Silver Triad. You will answer truthfully. The Triad's behavior will be witness. Do you understand?" "I understand," Elara said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to the highest benches. "Then we begin." Kaelen paced slowly before the council line. "The bond between a Lycan and its guide is sacred. Born of blood and moon shadow, you are human. You possess neither. Explain how this bond is possible." Elara kept her eyes on Kaelen, but her awareness was on the 3 warm presences at her sides. "I cannot explain the how, Elder. I can only describe the is. They were placed in my path. In their need, I offered care. In my care, they offered trust. The bond grew from that. It was not sought, but received. Not taken, but given." "A pretty sentiment," Kaelen said dismissively, "but sentiment is not substance. Demonstrate the bond. Command the Triad to perform a task." Elara shook her head slowly.
I cannot command them. We are not master and servant. I can suggest, and they choose." "Then suggest," Thalen sneered. "Have the largest Asher bring you that stone from the edge of the circle." He pointed to a fist-sized rock. Elara looked at Asher. She did not speak. She simply pictured the stone in her mind, and with that picture, she sent a feeling of curiosity, of a shared task. Asher looked at the stone, then at her. He tilted his head, then trotted over, picked up the stone gently in his jaws, and brought it to her, dropping it at her feet. He looked up at her, his tail giving a single wag. A murmur ran through the crowd. "Coincidence," Thalen said, but his eyes narrowed. "The female, Luna, have her identify which elder holds a moonstone in their hand." This was a trick. Elara could see no moonstone. She looked at Luna, sending a feeling of search, of discernment, of finding the hidden thing. Luna's nose twitched. She paced slowly before the semicircle of elders, her gaze intense. She passed Thalen, past several others, and stopped before Boren. She sat and let out a soft yip. Boren, a faint smile on his lips, opened his hand. A small, glowing moonstone lay in his palm. The murmur grew louder. "Pre-arranged," Thalen snapped, though he looked unsettled. "The pup chose," Boren said, his dry voice cutting through. "You demanded a demonstration of the bond's authenticity, not its obedience. You have been given it." Thalen's face flushed. He switched tactics. "The bond may exist, but of what nature is it? We have heard theories. That you are a siphon, draining their sacred energy for yourself, that your healing is a manifestation of this theft." A ripple of unease went through the chamber. This was the dangerous accusation. Elara felt a spike of anger, but forced it down, clinging to her calm. She felt Finn press against her leg, a steadying presence. "I am a healer," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I use herbs, knowledge, and a steady hand. What I did in the courtyard, any human with training could do. There is no theft, only skill." "But the Triad's sensitivity," Thalen pressed, seizing his main point. "Their reaction in the Whispering Woods to the rogue moon scouts, a powerful tool. And it is tied to you, a fragile, mortal creature. You are the weakness in our armor. If an enemy wanted to cripple the Triad, they would need only to target you. Your fear, your pain would become theirs. By binding them to you, you have made them vulnerable." The argument landed with deadly force. The council members leaned forward. This was the core of their fear. I saw Kaelen tense, but he remained silent, his gaze locked on her. This was her challenge to answer. She knelt down, placing herself at the level of the pups. She put a hand on Asher's sturdy shoulder, one on Luna's back, and cupped Finn's chin. She closed her eyes for a second, drawing on that deep well of calm, the healer's heart. When she opened them and looked up at Thalen and then at the entire council, her eyes were clear. "You speak of my fear, my pain," she said, her voice ringing in the cavern. "You are right. I feel fear. I am human. But this bond, it is not a conduit for terror. It is a crucible for courage." She stood, the pups rising with her, mirroring her posture. "When fear comes, it does not flood from me to them. It meets the calm they find in me and the strength they give me back. We transform it together. You see a vulnerability. I see a foundation. A stone is vulnerable to the hammer alone, but set in a wall with other stones, it becomes strength. I am not their weakness. I am the mortar. I am the thing that allows their individual strengths, Asher's courage, Luna's wisdom, Finn's loyalty, to bind together into something unbreakable." She took a step forward, the triad moving in perfect unison with her, a silent, silver symphony. You ask what I give them? I give them a heart that does not howl, but listens. I give them eyes that see not just prey and threat, but beauty and need. I give them the calm of the deep earth, not just the fire of the moon. I am a guide not of your blood, and that is my strength, and theirs, because I can guide them to a strength you have forgotten, the strength that comes from unity with what is different, not dominance over it. A profound silence followed her words, broken only by the sigh of the wind at the cavern mouth. Phelan was speechless, his argument dismantled not by counteraccusation, but by a vision he had not conceived. The council members exchanged glances, some moved, others deeply troubled. It was Kaelen who broke the stillness. He stepped into the moonlight at the center of the circle. His golden eyes swept the assembly, then settled on Elara with an expression that made her breath catch, a look of pure, unvarnished revelation. The challenge was for insight, he declared, his alpha voice resonating with a new, unshakable certainty. An insight has been granted. We have seen the bond, we have heard its nature. It is not a liability, it is a new paradigm. He turned to the council. The decree of death is hereby dissolved, permanently. Elara the healer is recognized as guide to the Silver Triad under the full protection and honor of Blackstone. This is my will. He did not ask for consensus. He stated it as law. And in the face of Elara's testimony, in the face of the Triad's serene unity, the council found no voice to oppose him. Phelan sank back into his throne, defeated. The full moon shone down, no longer a judge, but a witness to a new beginning. Elara felt the pup's joy wash over her, a warm silver wave. She had faced the council and not just survived, she had been seen. The storm was still on the horizon, but she had proven she could be the calm, and in that moment, it was enough. The formal recognition changed everything, and yet nothing. Elara was no longer a prisoner or a precarious guest. She was an official, albeit peculiar, member of Blackstone's hierarchy. Her title was Guide, and it came with a subtle shift in deference. Lycans she passed in the corridors now offered slight nods, not just stares. The meals brought to her chamber were of better quality. She was given a small, walled garden within the keep for the pups to play, a patch of earth and sky under guard, but still a taste of freedom. But the undercurrents of dissent did not vanish with Phelan's public defeat. They simply submerged, flowing through darker channels. The faction hardened, their opposition now fueled by humiliation and a deeper, more visceral fear of the change Elara represented. Whispers of the human sway over the Alpha began to circulate. Kaelen's decisive ruling was framed not as wisdom, but as enchantment. The old, poisonous idea that she was a siphon mutated into a new, more dangerous one. That she was a manipulator, using the Triad to cloud the Alpha's judgment and seize influence. Elara felt this new tension in the altered behavior of certain pack members. Averted gazes that lasted too long, conversations that died when she entered the room, a coldness from Goran, the traditional healer, who saw his authority undermined. She also felt it in the pups. While their core bond with her was stronger than ever, they now reacted to specific individuals. Asher would growl low in his throat when a particular guard from Phelan's retinue passed by. Luna would become very still and watchful around Goran. Finn would position himself strategically whenever a certain sleek-furred female elder named Valeria was near. The Triad was acting as a living lie detector, sensing hostility that smiles tried to hide. It was this sensitivity that led to the first fragile alliance. One afternoon in the garden, Elara was practicing basic herbology with plants Marin had procured, showing the pups the difference between wolfsbane and yarrow. A young Lycan female approached the garden gate, hesitating. She was around Elara's age, with intelligent amber eyes and a nervous posture. Elara recognized her as Sarah, the younger sister of the warrior she had healed in the courtyard. Harlan at the gate eyed her, but allowed her to enter after she murmured a request. Sarah approached, wringing her hands. "Guide Elara," she began, her voice soft. I wish to thank you for my brother, Kaelen. He walks without a limp now. Goran said he would have lost the leg." Elara smiled warmly. "I am glad to hear he is well. His own strength did most of the work." Sarah shook her head. "No, it was your skill. I have seen Goran's methods. They are harsh. We are strong, but we are not stone." She glanced at the pups, who had stopped their sniffing to observe. Luna padded forward and sniffed Sarah's hand. After a moment, Luna's tail gave a gentle wave. "They are magnificent," Sarah breathed, daring to stroke Luna's head. Her expression grew troubled. "Not all see what I see. My father is allied with Elder Thalen. He speaks of you at our table with scorn. But I see my brother whole. I see the Triad at peace with you. I do not understand the hatred." Elara felt a pang of sympathy. "Change is frightening. I represent a change your people did not ask for." Sarah leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's talk, guide, not just grumbling, secret meetings. My father speaks in hushed tones of correcting the Alpha's error, of finding a way to sever the bond for the pack's own good." Her eyes were wide with fear, not for herself, but for Elara. They would not move directly against the Alpha shield, but an accident, a mistake during a trip to the woods, poison in a meal that only humans affects? She shuddered. "I am betraying my own blood by telling you this, but saving my brother's life was a debt, and this is wrong."
The warning was a cold knife in Elara's chest. She had known the danger was abstract, but Sarah gave it shape and method. "Thank you, Sarah. This is a brave and kind thing you have done." Sarah nodded jerkily. "I can do little. I am not high-ranked. But I have ears. I will listen, and if I hear something specific—" She didn't finish, but the offer was clear. She was the first Lycan to openly defect from the hostility, motivated not by prophecy, but by simple, observed goodness. It was a crack in the wall of opposition, and it meant more to Elara than any council decree. She reported the conversation to Kaelen that evening. He listened, his face like carved stone, but a dangerous fire smoldered in his golden eyes. "Valeria," he muttered. "She is subtle, and she has knowledge of herbs. Thalen provides the will. She might provide the means." He paced the length of her chamber. "Sarah is brave, and her warning confirms what my own scouts have sensed. A plot is crystallizing. They will wait for a moment of perceived vulnerability." "How do we stop it?" Elara asked, the garden suddenly feeling like a trap. "We do not stop the snake by chasing it through the grass," Kaelen said, stopping to look at her. "We force it to strike where we are armored. We must appear unassailably strong.
And that means you and the Triad must become more public, more integrated. You will begin attending morning briefings. You will take your meals in the Great Hall with me. You will walk the outer walls. We will display the unity and strength of the bond so blatantly that any accident would be obviously assassination, inviting civil war they are not yet ready for. It was a terrifying prospect, to leave the relative safety of her tower and garden for the exposed stage of pack life, but she saw the logic. Hiding made her look weak, like prey. Standing in the light, under the Alpha's direct shadow, made her a part of the pack's fabric, and attacking her became a vastly more complicated act of treason. The next morning she walked into the Great Hall for the first time, the Triad at her heels. The buzz of conversation died. Hundreds of eyes turned to her. Kaelen, at the high table, raised a hand and gestured to an empty seat beside him, a seat of honor. Elara walked the long aisle, her back straight, feeling the weight of every gaze. Asher walked proudly, Luna with graceful poise, Finn with vigilant precision. She sat beside the Alpha, and the world did not end. The conversations resumed, though softer, laden with new calculations. It was the beginning of a new, more intense phase of her life at Blackstone. She was no longer a secret to be debated, but a fact to be endured, accepted, or rejected. Alliances were forming, both against her and, tentatively, for her. Sarah's was the first, but not the last. A young blacksmith, whose mate Elara had treated for a fever, nodded to her with gruff respect. A few of the older warriors, who valued results over tradition, began to acknowledge her. The wall was not crumbling, but it was developing gates. And behind it all, the hidden plotter, Valeria, watched with a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes, waiting for the unguarded moment. The challenge of insight had been a public battle won, but the private war for her life and the Triad's future had just entered a more deadly, silent stage. Life under the spotlight was an exhausting performance. Every meal in the Great Hall was an exercise in maintaining serene composure under scrutiny. Every walk along the outer walls was a parade, a demonstration of the Triad's unity and her own unwavering calm. The Pups adapted with remarkable grace, their innate dignity shining through. They seemed to understand the role they now played. Asher became a regal presence, Luna a picture of mystical poise, and Finn a silent, watchful guardian. Their bond with Elara was their anchor, and they held it fast. The fragile alliances grew. Sarah became a semi-regular, if discreet visitor to the garden, bringing snippets of information wrapped in gossip. The blacksmith, Torin, left a beautifully crafted silver-inlaid leather collar for each pup at her door, a gift of significant meaning and skill. A few of the younger warriors, curious and less bound by tradition, began to ask her hesitant questions about human healing during training yard breaks. But Kaelen was the epicenter of the tension. His public closeness to Elara was a constant, silent proclamation. He consulted her on matters involving the Triad's sensitivities, treating her input with a gravity that infuriated his opponents. He ensured she was included in discussions about border security, as the Triad's early warning ability was now a formal part of Blackstone's defenses. This integration was their armor, as he had said, but it also painted a target on his back. Whispers of the human's puppet alpha grew louder in certain quarters. Then the first attempt came. It was not a dramatic ambush or blatant poisoning. It was subtle, insidious, and born of a deep understanding of Lycan psychology. It began with sickness, not Elara's, but the Pups. It started with Luna. She refused her breakfast, a first. She lay listlessly in the garden, her usual sharp curiosity gone. By noon, Asher was vomiting. By evening, Finn was shivering with a fever, his tiny star mark seeming dull. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped Elara. She examined them, her healer's mind racing. There were no obvious wounds, no signs of trauma. It was a sickness, swift and severe. She called for Goran, setting aside pride for their sake. The traditional healer arrived, his expression smug. He examined the pups, sniffing their mouths, feeling their bellies. A wasting sickness, he pronounced with grim satisfaction. Sometimes it strikes the young and weak. Their bond to an unnatural guide has left them vulnerable. Their Lycan essence is confused. Elara's fear curdled into fury. This is not a confusion of essence. This is poisoning. Look at their gums, the faint blue tinge. Look at the dilation of their eyes.
Human diagnoses, Goran scoffed. You see what you wish to see. I have seen this before. The treatment is purging herbs and isolation. They must be taken to the healing caves, away from distracting influences. Isolation, away from her. The plot became horrifyingly clear. Poison the triad with something slow and Lycan in nature, blame it on the human bond, and use the crisis to separate them. Once isolated, complications could easily arise, or they could simply be kept apart until the bond frayed and they succumbed. No, Elara said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with rage. You will not take them. Goran drew himself up. I am the head healer of Blackstone. In matters of sickness, my word is law. Even the Alpha must defer. Guards. Harlan and Jax at the door looked conflicted. Their orders were to protect Elara and the Triad, but Goran's authority in healing was sacrosanct. As two of Goran's apprentices moved forward with slings, Elara threw herself over the shivering pups. Kaelen! The name was a desperate cry, ripped from her soul. He was there in moments, summoned by the commotion, or perhaps by the silent, panicked scream of the bond he was now attuned to. He filled the doorway, his power a physical pressure. Explain. Goran repeated his diagnosis and demand. Kaelen's eyes went to Elara, kneeling protectively over the pups, her face white with strain. He looked at the pups, their vibrant silver dimmed. Then he looked back at Goran, and his gaze was lethal. You say it is a wasting sickness, a natural ailment? Kaelen's olden eyes, fixed on Goran, held the stillness of a predator before the kill. A natural ailment? He repeated, his voice deceptively soft, striking all three, simultaneously, within hours. A remarkable coincidence. Goran's smugness faltered under the Alpha scrutiny. The bond makes them one in spirit, and thus in sickness, my Alpha. It is the danger I warned of. Elara, her fingers stroking Finn's feverish head, found her voice. It was low, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. Wolf's bane. Not the crude root, but a distillate of the leaf. It acts slowly on Lycan physiology, mimicking a wasting fever. The blue tinge on the gums, the pupil dilation, it's textbook. But you would know that, wouldn't you, Healer Goran? As would anyone with access to the restricted poison stores and knowledge of subtle herbcraft. A deadly silence gripped the room. Accusing the head healer of poisoning the sacred triad was tantamount to declaring war on his entire faction. Goran's face purpled. You dare, you human witch. You seek to blame your own failing on... Enough. Kaelen did not shout. The word was a whip crack of authority. He turned to Harlan. Secure Healer Goran. He is not to touch the triad, nor is he to leave this chamber. Jax, bring Elder Valeria to me. Now. His orders were swift, leaving no room for question. The plot was too elegant for Goran alone. It required a finer, more political mind. Valeria's. He then knelt beside Elara, his large frame somehow making the space around the suffering pups feel sheltered, not crowded. You are sure. wolfsbane distillate. Yes, Elara whispered, her professional certainty battling her personal terror. There's an antidote, but it requires fresh juniper berries, mistletoe sap harvested at dawn, and the bile of a healthy lichen who has not shifted in a week. The ingredients, they're rare, but not impossible. The knowledge of the formula, it's obscure human lore. Valeria would know it. She studies old, forgotten texts. Kaelen's jaw tightened. A trap within a trap. The poison was chosen not just for its effect, but because the antidote was complex and required cooperation. It forced his hand, publicly. Valeria arrived, gliding into the room with an air of composed concern. Alpha, you summoned me. I heard the Triad is ill. A tragedy. Her eyes swept over the scene, lingering on Goran's furious, detained form, then on Elara's desperate posture. Wolf's bane distillate, Kaelen stated, rising to his full height, looming over her. The antidote requires juniper, dawn mistletoe, and lichen bile. You will provide the bile, Valeria, from your own body, now. The sleek elder's composure cracked for a single, revealing instant, a flash of shock and fury. She had not anticipated being unmasked so quickly, nor being directly implicated. My Alpha, this is a grotesque accusation. To demand a bodily sacrifice based on a human's guess? It is not a guess, Elara interrupted, her gaze locking with Valeria's. She drew on every ounce of the calm she preached, letting her healer's authority radiate. The star-marked one, Finn, he is the most sensitive. Before he fell ill, he would whimper and hide when you were near. Not fear of a powerful lichen, fear of a specific, cold intent. He smelled the poison on your intentions, Elder. The Triad knows. And now, so do we. The use of the Triad as a witness was a masterstroke. It bypassed logic and struck directly at lichen reverence for their sacred symbols. Valeria paled. She looked at Kaelen, at the unyielding ice in his eyes, and saw no bluff. Her options had vanished. To refuse was to admit guilt. To comply was a humiliating submission, but it preserved a shred of deniability. For the sake of the Triad, she said through clenched teeth, her voice hollow. She nodded to one of Goran's now cowed apprentices, who hurried forward with a small ceremonial blade and vial. The next hours were a frantic, silent race. While Valeria provided the bitter golden bile, under the Alpha's unblinking gaze, Kaelen sent his most trusted runners for the juniper and mistletoe. Elara worked, grinding, mixing, her hands steady though her soul trembled. The pup's breathing grew more ragged. Asher's vibrant energy was utterly still. Luna seemed to be fading into the furs. Finn's whimpers had ceased, which was most terrifying of all. Finally, the antidote was ready, a thick, pungent paste. Elara administered it gently, massaging their throats to make them swallow. Then there was nothing to do but wait. She sat on the floor, cradling Finn, with Asher and Luna pressed against her sides. Kaelen dismissed everyone but Harlan, ordering the door sealed. He did not sit on the throne-like chair in the room, but leaned against the wall near the fireplace, a silent, watchful sentinel. The fire crackled, the only sound in the heavy silence.
Minutes felt like ages. Elara prayed to any deity that would listen, her tears falling silently into Finn's fur. Then, a miracle. Finn let out a shuddering sigh, deeper than before. His body, which had been rigid with pain, relaxed marginally. A moment later, Luna stirred, licking Elara's hand weakly. Asher gave a faint, grumbling moan. The relief that washed over Elara was so profound it felt like pain. She bent over them, weeping openly now, tears of sheer, staggering gratitude. She felt the cold knot of poison in their bond begin to dissolve, replaced by a trickle of returning warmth and vitality. From his post, Kaelen watched. He watched the human woman sob over the sacred wolves, her love for them a raw, palpable force in the room. He watched the silver fur, once dull, begin to regain its subtle glow under her trembling touch. In that private, desperate vigil, all politics fell away. There was no guide, no alpha, no prophecy. There was only a healer fighting for her family and a king witnessing the true, unadorned power of the bond he had gambled his authority on. After a long while, when the pups had slipped into a natural, healing sleep, their breaths even, Elara looked up, her face streaked with tears. She found Kaelen's eyes already on her. The fierce, judgmental intensity was gone. In its place was something quieter, more profound, acknowledgement, respect that had moved from the mind to the soul. "They will recover," she whispered, voicing the hope she now felt as truth. "I never doubted they would. Not with you here." He pushed off the wall. "The plotters have shown their fangs and missed. Goran will be stripped of his title and confined. Valeria's influence is shattered. She provided the antidote under duress, which condemns her as surely as a confession. The faction is broken, for now." Elara nodded, exhaustion seeping into her bones. "They tried to use healing as a weapon, to turn care into a vulnerability." Kaelen took a step closer, looking down at the sleeping triad, then at her. "They understand force. They understand dominance. They do not understand that some bonds are forged in vulnerability, and that is what makes them unbreakable." He paused. "You called for me, not as Alpha, by name." Elara met his gaze, the memory of her desperate cry returning. I didn't know what else to do." "It was the right thing to do," he said, and it felt like more than just reassurance about the pups. It felt like a cornerstone being laid. "Rest, Elara. The storm has broken for tonight. I will have guards you trust outside. No one will disturb you." He left then, and the chamber felt both emptier and safer. Elara laid down beside her pups, curling around them, their rising warmth her blanket. The sting of betrayal was deep, a wound that would leave a scar, but the antidote had worked on more than just the poison. It had proven, beyond any council challenge, the necessity and strength of her place. The attackers had sought to sever the bond, and in doing so had only tempered it in the fires of treachery, making it stronger than anyone, even Elara, had dared to believe.
Kaelen stopped, leaning on the sun-warmed stone. He looked at her, not as Alpha to guide, but as Kaelen to Elara. "You have brought more than a prophecy to life, Elara. You have brought a possibility, one my pack fears, and one I am only beginning to understand." His gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. The air between them thickened with something unnameable, a recognition that went beyond duty or destiny. Alara's heart stumbled. She looked away, focusing on the distant mountains. "The possibility was always there, Kaelen. It just needed a bridge. I don't know if I am that bridge or just the first stone." "You are the foundation," he said, his voice certain. Then, as if catching himself, he straightened, the Alpha mask sliding back into place, though it seemed less absolute than before. "The rogue moon grows bolder. Our scouts report they are massing near the Whispering Woods border. They have heard of our internal strife. They will test us soon." The peaceful interlude was over. The external threat, held at bay by the pack's fractiousness, now saw an opening. "What will you do?" Elara asked. "I will meet them," Kaelen said, his eyes hardening to the gold of battle. "Not with the full war pack, not yet. A show of strength, a border conclave, Alpha to Alpha. But I must take the Triad. Their presence is a symbol of our unity and ancient legitimacy. It may give the rogue Alpha a pause." Elara's blood turned to ice. Take the Triad into a potential battlefield? They're not weapons. "No," he agreed. "They are a standard, a living banner, and they must be seen with their guide. Your calm is their strength. It will broadcast to the rogues that we are not divided, but united in a new way. Your presence is non-negotiable." Fear, old and familiar, coiled in her stomach, but she looked at Asher, Luna, and Finn, now sitting attentively a few yards away, sensing the shift in the conversation. They were not afraid. They were alert, ready. They had been born for more than a tower. She was their guide, and a guide did not hide when the path led into danger. "Then we will go," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a resolve that surprised her. Kaelen nodded, a flicker of that same respect, and something warmer, something like pride in his eyes. "We leave in 3 days. Boren will have historical context for the Rogue Moon Pack. Harlan and Jax will train you and the Triad in defensive formations. You will not fight, but you must be a stone they cannot move." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Boren filled her mind with the history of the Rogue Moon Pack, Lycans who rejected the Council's laws centuries ago, embracing a more brutal pack supremacy ideology. They saw the Triad not as a spiritual key, but as a source of raw power to be dominated. Harlan and Jax drilled her and the pups in a simple, effective pattern. The Triad would form a tight triangle around her, facing outward. A single, unified thought from her would dictate their movement: advance, hold, or retreat. They practiced in the training yard, drawing crowds. The sight of the magnificent Silver Triad moving as one with the human woman in their center was awe-inspiring. It was not a war formation. It was a living fortress. The night before departure, Elara could not sleep. She stood at her window, watching the moon. It was a sliver, a claw scratch in the sky. Finn came to stand beside her, leaning his heavy head against her hip. She stroked his ear. "Are you afraid?" She sent the thought along with the feeling of the question. The response was not from Finn alone, but from all three, a composite feeling of sharp alertness, of pack unity, of a deep instinctive readiness to protect what was theirs. Beneath it, a thread of excitement for the unknown. They were Lycans, after all. The wild called to them. There was a soft knock. It was Kaelen. He was not in his formal attire, but in simple travel leathers. He carried a long, narrow bundle. "I have something for you," he said, his voice low. He unwrapped the bundle. It was a dagger, but unlike any she had seen. The blade was forged from a dark, smoky metal that seemed to drink the light. The hilt was wrapped in silver wire, and nestled in the pommel was a single, small moonstone that glowed with its own inner light. It is called Moonshadow, forged in a time when humans and Lycans were allies. The blade is not for killing Lycans. It cannot pierce our hide in true form, but it will cut through bonds, rope, leather. It disrupts dark magic, and it is a symbol. Any Lycan who sees it will know the bearer is under the protection of the Alpha line and the old pacts. He offered it to her, hilt first. "You may not need it, but I would feel better if you carried it." Elara took the dagger. It was lighter than it looked, perfectly balanced. The moonstone pulsed gently against her palm, a reassuring rhythm. It was not a weapon of war, but a tool of sovereignty and protection. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. In the dim light, the usual barriers between them felt thin. "Elara," he said, her name a rough caress on his tongue. At the conclave, no matter what is said, no matter what posturing occurs, you hold your center. You are the calm. The Triad is the strength. I will be the shield. Trust in that." "I do," she said, and realized she meant it. She trusted him, not just as Alpha, but as Kaelen. He held her gaze for a long, charged moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "Dawn comes early. Rest if you can." He turned and left, leaving her with the moon shadow dagger and a heart that beat a frantic, hopeful rhythm against her ribs. The calm between storms was over. Tomorrow,
They would march into the teeth of the gale. But she was not the woman who had cowered in a hut waiting for death. She was Elara, guide to the Silver Triad, bearer of moon shadow, and she walked with the Alpha of Blackstone. They were a bridge, a foundation, a new possibility, and they were walking into the storm together. The journey to the border was a somber, swift procession. 50 of Blackstone's fiercest warriors, led by Kaelen, moved with a lethal, quiet efficiency. Elara rode in their center, on a sturdy mare, the Triad loping effortlessly alongside. They were a breathtaking sight, 3 massive, silver-washed wolves moving with a synchronicity that seemed to weave a protective net around her. The moon shadow dagger was secured at her belt, its cool weight a constant reminder of Kaelen's trust. They reached the designated site by midday, a barren, rocky plateau where the whispering woods gave way to the harsh scrubland claimed by the rogue moonpack. A cold wind whipped across the stones, carrying the scent of dust, pine, and a faint, unfamiliar musk. On the far side of the plateau, the rogue moon contingent was already assembled. They were fewer in number, but radiated a raw, aggressive energy. Their fur was darker, often matted or scarred. They wore trophies, bones, teeth in their manes and on leather straps. At their head stood their alpha, a brute of a Lycan in human form named Draven. He was a head taller than Kaelen, his body a mass of knotted muscle, his face a roadmap of old violence. His eyes, a flat, hungry yellow, swept over the Blackstone force and landed instantly, magnetically, on the Silver Triad. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. The two groups halted, 100 yards of no man's land between them. The silence was broken only by the whining wind. Kaelen stepped forward, shifting seamlessly into his towering dark-furred wolf form, a display of effortless power and control. A ripple of unease went through the rogue ranks. Draven merely chuckled and shifted as well, his form a hulking, brindled monster with a mangled ear. The alphas met in the center. Their communication was a series of growls, snarls, and body language, too complex for Elara to follow. But the tension was a living thing, coiling in the air. She kept her focus inward, on her calm center, projecting it to the Triad. Steady. Hold. After several tense minutes, the alphas separated. Kaelen shifted back, his face a mask of controlled fury. Draven did the same, his smile now a sneer. "He refuses to acknowledge the Council's authority," he said, his voice carrying back to his warriors. "He claims the Silver Triad are relics of a weak age. He says they belong with the strong." His golden eyes found Elara's. "He has demanded a trial of worth for the Triad." A collective growl rose from the Blackstone warriors. Harlan stepped forward. "Alpha, it is a trap. They have no right." "He claims the right of a challenger to the old ways." Kaelen cut him off, his gaze never leaving Elara. "If we refuse, he names us cowards and claims the moral right to take them by force, inciting all the rogue packs. If we accept, it is a contest of 3 challenges chosen by him, for the Triad and their guide." They nuzzled her, their confidence a warm wave in return. They were not afraid. They were eager. This was a test of their essence. At dusk, the Triad was led to the jagged, dark entrance of the scarred woods. The air that wafted out was stale and bitter. Draven's 3 hunters, lean and vicious-looking, shifted into wolf form nearby. Kaelen gave a sharp nod. Elara, her heart in her throat, sent one final pulse of love. "Go." With a furious gesture, Draven signaled one of his men to cut Elara free.
Her hands numb, she fell to her knees, and the Triad was upon her in an instant, licking her face, nuzzling her, a whirlwind of relieved silver fur. She buried her face in their necks, shaking, the emotional toll crashing down. But Draven was not finished. Humiliation demanded a bloody price. "The third challenge," he bellowed. "Strength. Now. Your Triad chooses its champion." The air, which had eased for a moment, tightened again. This was the trap. The Triad would choose Elara, and she would be sent to die. Kaelen's warriors tensed, hands on weapons. This was where the truce would shatter, where words would fail, and blood would water the stones.
Boren summoned Elara to the library one last time. The ancient scholar looked more frail, but his eyes burned with a feverish light. "The texts were incomplete," he rasped, unrolling a crumbling scroll Elara had never seen. "But the trial has illuminated them. The Silver Triad are not merely a symbol, child. They are a tuning fork for the world's spirit. Their bond with you, a guide of peaceful intent, attunes them to harmony. But in the hands of a creature like Draven, attuned to domination and chaos," he shuddered. "They could become a weapon that shatters not just bodies, but the very will of packs, bending them to his tyranny. He does not just want them, he must become their guide by destroying you and breaking their spirits to his will." The stakes were no longer about one pack's future, but the fate of all Lycan kind. "How do we stop him?" Elara asked, her voice small in the vast, silent library. Boren pointed a trembling finger at a line of shimmering, almost liquid script on the scroll. "The final unification. When guide and guided are no longer separate threads, but a single cord. When the heart of the bridge and the strength of the Silder become one. That is when their true purpose awakens, and it can only be achieved in the face of absolute, annihilating discord. It is a terrible gamble." That night, under a moon that was a perfect, luminous coin, the storm broke. It did not come with the sound of an army, but with a silence that fell over the keep like a shroud. The night birds ceased, the wind died. Then from the whispering woods a single twisted howl erupted, a sound that was the antithesis of the Triad's harmonious call. It was a scream of rending, of hunger, of void. It was Draven's howl, but amplified, distorted by a dark and stolen magic. It clawed at the mind, sowing instant dread and confusion. Alarms sounded. Kaelen was at her door in moments, armed for war. "He's here. Not with an army, with a cabal. They're using some kind of sonic corruption, targeting the Triad's frequency. We must get you to the heart of the keep, the Moonwell Chamber. It's the most defensible, and its ancient stones may amplify their harmonic nature." They moved through chaos. Lycan guards clutched their heads, disoriented by the psychic assault. Shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. The Triad flanked Elara, their own low, harmonious hum creating a bubble of calm around her, but she could feel the strain. Draven's discord was a physical pressure seeking cracks. They reached the Moonwell Chamber, a circular room deep in the mountain's heart. In its center was a pool of water that reflected the moon even here, fed by a subterranean spring. The walls were covered in ancient glowing runes. As they barred the heavy doors, they could hear the sounds of fighting and corruption drawing closer. Then silence again. A heavy, suffocating silence. The runes on the walls flickered. The great doors did not burst open. They simply dissolved, turning to dust, as if centuries passed in a second. In the doorway stood Draven, but he was changed. His form was wreathed in twisting shadows, and his eyes were pits of that same hungry void. Behind him stood a circle of rogue shamans, their chants the source of the dissolving discordant magic. "There is no stone that can hide you from the song of unraveling," Draven's voice echoed, multiplied and hollow. "The silver will be mine. I will break your heart before them, and their song will become my dirge." Kaelen and his guards surged forward, but the shaman's chant twisted the air. Weapons turned brittle and snapped. Lycan's strength seemed to sap away. It was magic designed not to fight, but to negate, to create a null zone where only Draven's will and the corrupted magic could exist. The triad stepped forward, their harmonious hum rising to a defiant chord. The opposing forces, silver harmony and void discord, clashed in the center of the chamber. The very stone vibrated. The Moonwell waters churned. But Draven's power, fed by sacrifice and hatred, was overwhelming. The triad's song began to fray at the edges. Elara felt their pain as a sharp, screaming note in her soul. Draven laughed and strode towards her, ignoring Kaelin's enraged but helpless struggles against the nullifying field. Let them see their guide extinguished. This was the annihilating discord. This was the end. As Draven raised a clawed hand wreathed in void shadows, Elara did not look at him. She looked at Asher, Luna, and Finn. She looked at Kaelen, fighting impossible odds for her. She thought of Sarah's kindness, Boren's wisdom, the healed warrior, the blooming garden, the quiet hut, and the 3 tiny lives that had changed everything. She did not find her calm center. She became it. She stopped being Elara, the separate being. She became the bridge itself, not a thing to be crossed, but a living connection. She opened her heart, not in fear, but in an act of absolute, selfless surrender, not to Draven, but to the bond. She offered every memory, every hope, every quiet joy and fierce protection directly into the silver thread that tied her soul to theirs. In that moment, the guide vanished. The guided vanished. There was only the cord. A light erupted from the triad, not from around them, but from within them, as if their silver fur was merely a sheath for a captured galaxy. The light did not attack Draven's void, it absorbed it. It was a sound made light, a harmony so complete it had room for the discord, transformed it, made it part of a greater, more beautiful song. The 3 wolves did not move, but their forms blurred, their essence merging with the light pouring from Elara's own heart. For a breathtaking second, in the center of the chamber, there stood a magnificent, towering spirit wolf, woven from starlight and harmony, with Elara's compassionate eyes and the 3-fold soul. It was the unified spirit. It opened its maw and did not howl. It sang.
The song was the first sunrise after a long winter. It was the healing of a deep wound. It was the understanding between species. It was the triad's playful joy, Elara's gentle strength, and the unbreakable promise of their union. The song was a wave of pure, creative reality. It washed over Draven and his shamans. The void shadows shattered like black ice. The corrupt magic unraveled, not into nothing, but into harmless starlight. Draven did not scream. He gasped, as if breathing clean air for the first time. His eyes clearing of the void, filled with a staggering, terrible realization of what he had become and what he had tried to destroy. He and his shamans fell to their knees, not in defeat, but in awe. Their aggression utterly dissolved by the overwhelming, merciful beauty of the song. It washed over the keep, healing disorientation, mending cracks in stone and spirit. It flowed into the whispering woods, silencing the twisted echoes. Then the song faded. The magnificent spirit wolf dissolved into a cascade of falling light. As the light settled, 4 forms lay on the floor by the moonwell. Elara, unconscious but breathing softly, a faint silver glow lingering on her skin. And around her, the Triad, Asher, Luna, and Finn. No longer giant, but returned to the size of ordinary, those stunningly beautiful wolves. Their fur was pure, luminous silver now, and in the center of each of their foreheads a new mark gleamed, a tiny, perfect rune that looked like intertwining bridge and star. The silence that followed was holy. Kaelen, the nullifying field gone, was the first to move. He went to Elara, lifting her gently. Her eyes fluttered open. They were her own gentle brown, but for a second, a flash of silver constellations swirled within them. She looked at the Triad, who stirred and rose, shaking themselves. The bond was still there, deeper than ever, but it was no longer a connection between separate beings. It was a shared state of being. They were 1 and 4 simultaneously. She looked at Draven, who remained on his knees, his head bowed, all malice drained away, replaced by a hollow, awe-struck shame. What was that?" he whispered. "The future," Kaelen said, his voice thick with emotion. "One you tried to break, but some harmonies cannot be broken. They can only be joined." In the days that followed, Blackstone Keep was transformed, not by war, but by wonder. The unified song had been felt by every Lycan for miles. The rogue moon pack, their alpha broken not in body but in spirit, sued for true peace. Draven, under Boren's guidance, began a long penance, seeking to understand the harmony he had tried to dominate. The Triad, with their new runes, became living treasures. Their presence ensured health, peace, and understanding. Lycans and, slowly, trusting humans from nearby settlements began to interact not with fear, but with mutual curiosity. The bridge was no longer a metaphor. It was a reality sung into existence. And Elara, she walked in both worlds. She lived in a sunlit chamber filled with plants, the Triad her constant companions. She healed, she advised, she guided. Kaelen ruled at her side, not as her keeper, but as her partner. Their bond, forged in trust and tested in fire, had deepened into a love as steady and enduring as the mountains. A love of mutual respect, shared purpose, and a quiet, unshakable devotion that needed no grand declarations, only the certainty of a shared glance across a council table or a silent walk under the stars with 3 silver wolves weaving between them. On the first anniversary of the Howling Dawn, Elara stood on the battlements at sunrise. The whispering woods below were alive with normal, healthy sounds. Blackstone's gates stood open. In the meadow between the woods and the keep, she saw a young Lycan pup chasing a human child from Eldergrove, both laughing. Asher, Luna, and Finn sat around her, their calm, ancient eyes watching over the world they had helped remake. Kaelen joined her, his hand finding hers. No words were needed. The prophecy was complete, but the story was just beginning. It was a story not of survival, but of synthesis. Not of a human who lived among wolves, but of a new song for a new world, born from the heart of a healer and the spirit of 3 silver pups. A song that would echo forever in the Howling Dawn.